This is Robert Durst. Mr. Durst is present. Mr. Chesnoff and Mr. DeGuerin. We have Mr. Henderson, Mr. Miata, Mr. Bailey, and Mr. Lewin. You may resume your questions.
Mr. Durst, you're aware that in the statements that Susan Berman gave to the individuals that I discussed, that she didn't tell them all what you characterize as the same lie. Would you agree? There were differences.
Yes, they are the same.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry. One of these days I'll remember to turn it on.
There were substantial differences in what those people testified to that Susan Berman had said.
Well, let me ask you, Mr. Durst, you would agree that the statement to Miriam Barnes was that Susan had done something for you, and that if anything happened to her, Bobby did it. That's what Miriam Barnes testified to, correct?
Correct.
You agree that Lorraine Newman testified that, again, Susan had done something for you to provide you with an alibi for Kathy's disappearance, correct?
Correct.
Linda Opes said that Susan told her that she had called Einstein Medical School pretending to be Kathy, correct?
Correct.
Mela Kaufman testified that Susan told her that she had called the medical school pretending to be Kathy, correct?
I thought Mela's Kaufman's testimony was much more complex than that.
No, I'm not giving the whole thing. I'm just saying that she said that, among other things, that in the end, Susan had told her that she, Susan, had called the medical school pretending to be Kathy. So she didn't use the words Albert Einstein with Mela Kaufman. Mela Kaufman said she called the medical school pretending to be Kathy, correct?
I thought Mela Kaufman's testimony was more complex than just that Susan said, I called the medical center.
Now, so let me be clear. I'm not saying that it wasn't more complex. I'm saying that, among other things, Mela testified that Susan told her that she called the medical school pretending to be Kathy, correct?
Correct.
And Susie Harmon didn't mention anything about Susan calling the medical school. She said that regarding Kathy's disappearance, that there had been a fight and that Kathy fell down the stairs, correct?
I might have it confused. I'll accept that she's the one who said Kathy fell down the stairs.
So would you agree, Mr. Durst, that given how bright Susan is, that it's not that she couldn't remember what the story was, it's that she chose to tell different people different things? Would you agree?
I would imagine she probably more or less remembered more or less what she told different people. Why she chose to tell them different stories would be just something in Susan's personality.
Would you agree then, Mr. Durst, that all the questions by your attorneys that went to, for instance, with Lorraine Newman about her drug use and if she was lying, or Linda Opst about why she didn't come forward earlier, or Mela Kaufman about are you sure you heard what you heard, you would now say that all those questions, Mr. Durst, your position is that you're not disputing that those witnesses were testifying to exactly what Susan told them, correct?
Oh, I'm not going to go there. exactly what Susan told them, one of the people, maybe Steve Silverman, said, when you have a conversation with Susan Berman, you listen. Susan Berman would talk and talk and talk.
Now my question though, Mr. Durst, is as an example, there was a lot of cross-examination with Lorraine Newman regarding her drug use and how that affected her memory. Do you recall that cross-examination?
Sort of.
Am I correct that your position now is not that there was anything wrong with Lorraine Newman's memory at all, it's that what she is repeating that Susan told her was a lie, correct?
What Susan told each of those people was a lie.
Right, but their testimony regarding their memory of what Susan told them, you're not disputing that at all now. You're basically saying kind of junk in, junk out, correct?
I think Susan talked a lot and very quickly. And whether they remembered everything that Susan said is questionable.
So, Mr. Durst, since the break, are you now kind of backing away from the statement you said a little while ago where you agreed that these witnesses, you had no issue with their truth or their memory? Your position was Susan was lying when she told them that, not that these witnesses had any problem with their truth or their memory. Are you now backing away from that position?
No, I'm not backing away with that from position.
So that still reflects your belief, is that correct?
My belief is that Susan made up stories and told lots of people stories.
And those witnesses came into court and they accurately repeated the stories. It's just that what they're repeating is false. That's your position, right?
Well, now this is what the lady psychologist reported about how people's memories change over time. So I'm not saying that Miriam Barnes or Lorraine Newman purposely lied, but I am saying I'm not willing to accept that they remembered exactly what Susan said, because Susan would take a long time in any conversation.
And what I'm asking you, Mr. Durst, is not whether they remember the exact words, but so as an example, you're not disputing now that Susan Berman told Linda Obst, I called Einstein Medical School pretending to be Kathy. Your position, am I correct, is that yes, Susan Berman told Linda Obst that or something very similar, but when Susan Berman said it, she was lying. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I didn't hear the answer.
Everything that Susan Berman said about providing an alibi for me or calling Albert Einstein was a lie.
Right, but listen to my question. But you're not saying that the witnesses in coming in here and repeating what she told them, you're not saying, first of all, that they're lying, correct?
I am not saying that any of the witnesses lied.
And you're also not saying that any of the witnesses were mistaken regarding the substance of what they're saying, correct?
You see, I am saying that a little bit, because I remember my conversations with Susan Berman would go for a long time, and she would talk at length. I always found it very hard to pay attention to what Susan was saying.
Well, Mr. Durst, do you really think that these witnesses were having a hard time paying attention to Susan telling them that she helped cover up a murder?
Overly broad, what witnesses?
Vague.
What was that, Your Honor?
He said overly broad, which is a way of saying vague, and I'll sustain it.
Okay, Mr. Durst, what I'm asking you is, gosh, I just forgot what my question was.
You'd ask him all the witnesses.
Mr. Durst, could I have the question read back here? I apologize if the court has it right there.
Please.
I apologize.
Well, objection was sustained to the question.
No,
Did it, should we?
I don't think this question was sustained.
Objection was sustained.
No, it was overly broad, it was vague, so he's going to hear you need to hear the question in order to rephrase it.
Thank you,
I think
Your
that's
Honor.
what's going on. She's rereading it to him, so he can rephrase it.
Well, Mr. Durst, do you really think that these witnesses were having a hard time paying attention to Susan telling them that she helped cover up a murder?
So,
I got
answer
it.
that.
Mr.
Ask a new
Durst.
question.
Would you agree that Susan Berman discussing that she had helped cover up a murder is a pretty significant area of conversation? Would you agree?
Yes,
So is it your position then that the witnesses weren't really paying attention and aren't sure what she said?
yes, I can remember my conversations with Susan Berman, whereby in the same conversation, she would talk about the dog's operation, what she made for dinner, what Niles Brenner had said when she tried to get him into bed, and how Mella was doing at school, all in the same conversation.
Did she ever talk to you about covering up any murders during a conversation with her?
No,
Don't you think, Mr. Durst, that if she had, you'd remember?
she was under the impression that her father had been murdered, and she had gotten a freedom of information.
Motion to strike is non-responsive.
Overruled.
That wasn't the question I asked you, Mr. Durst.
What did you ask me?
Did she ever discuss with you, did she ever say to you, hey, you know what, Bob, I helped cover up a murder?
She never said that to me.
Had she said that to you, don't you think that's something you would clearly remember?
It depends what the context of it was. There was much that Susan said to me that I thought was just a big story.
So I'm not asking you whether you would believe it, I'm asking you if you would remember it.
Maybe and maybe not.
Okay, I want to go back to your sailboat. You said that the sailboat was being taken to the dump. Who was taking the sailboat to the dump? Let me strike that. The sailboat was being taken to the dump by the Weiner kid, is that correct?
I had asked Barry Weiner to take the sailboat to the dump
Why was the sailboat being taken to the dump?
because the sailboat was rotting.
But isn't that the same sailboat that you ended up selling to Bill Mayer?
No, when I sold that, the sailboat, I had bought two sailboats. First one was rotting away, and I wanted taken to the dump. The second one was in pretty good shape when I sold the South Salem house.
Mr. Durst, isn't it true that there's never been discussion about anything more than one sailboat, and you just realized right now that you made a boo-boo and tried to cover it up by now bringing up a second boat that doesn't exist? Isn't that what just happened?
Object to the comment.
Overruled.
Everything you just said is untrue.
What kind of boat, what was the sailboat? You gave the brand. What was the sailboat that you were having the Weiner kid?
They're called sailfishes. They're the littlest sailboat they make, but they were perfect for Lake Truesdale, which was a small lake, and you were not allowed to have a gas motor on it. It came with a rudder and a main sail and a jib sail.
Isn't that-
One person could sail it, and it could hold 4 people.
Isn't that the same kind of boat that you sold to Bill Mayer?
I was not aware that I had sold the boat to Bill Mayer. I thought that when I sold the house, I left the sailboat for the buyer.
Okay, so that wasn't the question I asked. That was whether you sold it to Bill Mayer, as he testified, or whether you left it for the buyer. That's the exact boat, the same kind of boat that you were saying you had before that you told the Weiner kid to take to the dump, correct?
It was the same kind of boat. The boat was made out of balsa wood with stretched canvas, and if you dragged it up on the shore a few times, the canvas would get scraped and the balsa wood would get waterlogged.
My question, though, Mr. Durst, is that is the same brand, the same kind of boat that you sold to Bill Mayer. In other words, your testimony is you had 2 of the exact same kind of boats. Is that correct?
Correct.
And would you agree, Mr. Durst, that before your testimony 5 minutes ago, you'd never mentioned that you had 2 different boats, correct?
I don't agree to that at all, and I don't remember selling the boat to Bill Mayer.
You heard,
Everybody on the lake had the same kind of boat.
you heard Bill Mayer's testimony. Do you have any reason to doubt that that testimony was accurate? You heard him say he bought the boat from you and he still has it today.
I don't remember him saying he bought the boat. I don't doubt that he bought the boat.
So let's talk about Barry Weiner for a second. Again, can you tell me, to the best of your memory, exactly how old was he in 1982?
He was 18.
And he was a senior or a junior in high school?
Correct.
Well, he can't be both. Was he a junior or a senior in high school?
I thought you asked me if he was a senior in high school, and the answer is he was a senior in high school.
And I assume he was going to the local high school, correct?
Correct.
And you said that you had asked him to rent a car or a truck, is that correct?
He had to rent a pickup truck.
Mr. Durst, are you aware of if in 1982, if individuals who were under 25 were allowed to rent vehicles?
I have no idea.
Well, Mr. Durst, if it turned out, I want you to assume for a moment that rental agencies restricted, without somebody signing, individuals who were under 25 from renting vehicles. What would your response be as to how he was going to do that?
To the best of my knowledge, he rented a pickup truck.
No basis for it.
Overruled.
No basis in that.
Overruled.
You said he rented a pickup truck. He actually got the pickup truck.
To the best of my knowledge, he rented a pickup truck and he took the sailfish to the town dump.
And this occurred right after Kathy disappeared, is that correct?
Yes.
So your wife is missing, and you're hiring high school kids to rent trucks to transport your sailboat to the dump. That's where you're spending your time?
When I wrote the note was the week before Kathy went missing.
Now that's a new detail, right? You've never said that before, right?
I've said that repeatedly.
You've said it
That
repeatedly.
note was one of probably 4 or 5 notes I had made to myself for things I wanted to do in the 2 weeks from February 1st to February 15th.
When did
that I
you
had taken off from the office.
when did you make this list?
I think I made it on Friday, the 29th of January.
So you literally remember the date you made the list today. Is that correct?
Well, that Friday was my last day in the office, and I had written several notes for things I wanted to do during the next 2 weeks. What has been turned up is one of them.
How well did you know Barry Weiner?
He was the kid who mowed the lawn. I paid him something like $10 a month to mow the lawn and take care of the planting.
How well did you know him?
I'm going to tell you again that he was the kid who mowed the lawn. How well would I possibly know him?
Well, since I wasn't there, that's why I'm asking. How well did you know Barry Weiner?
I know that he mowed the lawn.
How long did he mow the lawn for you?
I think he worked for us for about 5 years.
And did you know his family at all?
I never met a family member.
I want to play for you, Mr. Durst, the first time that you mentioned Barry in direct examination. Can you play that, please, Mr. Henderson? Have we already marked this or no?
This will be equals 311, transcript 311A. This is video from Mr. Durst, August 11th testimony.
I called up the high school student who was used to.
Stop. Rewind, please.
I called up the high school student who was used to taking care of the outside of our house, mowed the lawn, and did the trimmings on the bushes and the trees, and took care of the plantings and everything. His name was Barry Weiner. I reminded Barry Weiner that he was supposed to rent a pickup truck to take the sailboat. It's called a sailfish. That's the model of it. That had come with the house and was waterlogged and falling apart. I asked Barry to rent the truck, get some of his friends, and take the sailfish to the town dump. I also asked him to go to the hardware store and buy several snow shovels, because we did not have Actually, we did have snow shovels, but they were stolen. So at that point, I had no snow shovel.
Is it important to have snow shovels there in South Salem during the winter?
Stop it. Mr. Durst, when you were first asked, you didn't mention anything about either dig or bridge, did you?
I answered his question.
Well, no, Mr. Durst, you were explaining what the list was about, and in explaining what the list was about, do you agree you did not mention either dig or bridge, correct?
I think I was specifically asked about the town dump.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that forgetting about what the note actually means, but if somebody's wife had disappeared, I want you to assume someone's wife disappeared, and the husband writes a note shortly after it's found that says town dump, bridge, dig, boat, other, shovel, check, car, truck, rent. Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that that sounds like possibilities of how you could get rid of a body? Would you agree?
I would not agree.
By the way, you said you've known Barry for 5 years, correct?
About, yes.
Yeah, you couldn't remember his name, though. You first called him Wiener, and for the last hour, I've been calling him Barry Weiner, and you've been calling him Barry Weiner. You forgot the name you gave him, didn't you?
Excuse me, that's a comment, an argument. I object upon the question.
Overruled.
I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, Mr. Durst, you originally called him Barry Weiner. And now, today, you've been calling him Barry Weiner yourself and answering that his name was Barry Weiner. And this is someone you've known for 5 years. How can you explain that?
Barry Weiner, Barry Wiener. That's not the same to you?
So, Mr. Durst, so if someone called you, someone said your name was Robert Durst, D-U-R-B-S-T, would that be the same as Robert Durst? Would that be a different name?
Well, Durst is with D-U-R-S-T. D-U-R-B-S is a different name.
So, Mr. Durst, are you telling me that you think the name Weiner and the name Wiener are the same name?
Yes.
So, Mr. Durst, which is it? Was his name Barry Wiener or was it Barry Weiner? You don't seem to be able to make up your mind.
Object to that comment.
Sustained.
Which was it?
I am sure he would have answered to either Barry Wiener or Barry Weiner.
What was his name? Which was it? He worked for you for 5 years.
I think I probably called him Barry Weiner sometimes, and Barry Wiener other times, and mostly I just called him Barry.
Was his dad's name, was it Oscar Mayer?
Oh, come on. Yeah.
Mr. Lewin.
Is it Wiener or Weiner, Mr. Durst?
We have a-
No, I've admonished him not to do that.
Is it Wiener or is it Weiner? Which is it?
I think I used both pronunciations.
Does it make
Sorry?
sense, Mr. Durst, to be calling somebody by a name that is not their correct name? Is that what you do?
It's the same.
Mr. Durst, if Weiner and Wiener were the same, then wouldn't they sound the same? They're different names, correct?
They're the same name.
Okay, let me move on. Would you agree that you are extremely thrifty with your money? You're cheap.
have been times in my life when I have been cheap.
Your brother said on a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being as cheap as possible, Tom said you would be a -50. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I would not agree with that.
You have referred to your...
This is the brother that hates me.
Well, you said the brother that hates you. Wouldn't it be brothers that hate you? It's both, right?
Well, Douglas hates me. I think Tom just doesn't like me.
Okay. So, would you agree, Mr. Durst, that you've also referred to yourself as being very cheap, correct?
I have referred to myself as being very cheap, mostly when Andrew asked me to say I was very cheap.
So, okay, so what you're saying is you have referred to yourself as being very cheap, but you're not really very cheap? Is that what you're saying now? Is that correct?
Sometimes I've been very cheap. Other times I've been just ordinary cheap. And sometimes I've been extravagant.
Generally speaking, with other people, Mr. Durst, you are cheap or very cheap. You are not extravagant. Is that correct?
What is the... I don't know what the question is.
With your friends, Mr. Durst, aren't you typically either cheap or very cheap and not extravagant?
Depends on what period of my life we're talking about and which friends we're talking about.
All right, let's talk about collect calls. You agree that you always called into work collect, is that right?
No.
RD 123, 12-12-10, page 262, line 17 to page
This is
263.
more Andrew.
Page 263, line 1. Let me play it and then you can comment.
That's correct. This is the 2010 Andrew interview, People's 269, page 37.
Someone said that they used to call the office collect.
Oh, all the time.
Tell me about that.
I would call the office collect.
Why did you do that?
I didn't want to pay for it. Let Seymour pay for it. The only reason I'm calling is because he wants me to call.
You would agree, Mr. Durst, that in that clip you were saying that you always called the office collect, correct?
I did not always call the office collect.
Mr. Durst, isn't it true that only you and family members would have their collect calls to the Durst organization accepted?
Quite the contrary. Numerous people called collect.
You heard Douglas Durst's testimony on April 13, 2014, where he said that the only people that would be accepted who worked for the Durst organization at that time were you and he. Do you recall that testimony?
I don't think that's what he said.
April 13, 2014, page 38, lines 9 through 16, he was asked, based on what was going on at that time, is there, first of all, would that be consistent with who would be able to make collect calls that would be accepted to the group? Answer, Bob and me. Question, anybody else? No audible response. Is that no? Answer, that's a no. No. Do you disagree with that statement?
Yes.
Who else would have their collect calls accepted?
Well, the thing of it was, whoever was running the switchboard could accept collect calls from whoever they wanted to accept collect calls from.
Well, except for you would agree that whoever's running the switchboard, the people at the Durst organization know who that is, and if they're accepting collect calls from people that are not authorized to be having their calls accepted, that switchboard operator is going to be in trouble, correct?
No,
You were present for the testimony of your brothers, Tom and Douglas, is that correct?
I was present.
Each of them described incidents near Kathy's disappearance where she separately told them that you were stealing from the family business. Do you recall those allegations?
I recall the allegations.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that if you were aware that she was making such allegations, whether they were true or not, that that would potentially be a motive for you to be very upset with her?
Kathy was saying all kinds of things.
So you were aware at the time that she was saying that you were stealing from your family's organization, correct?
She said that over a long period of time to various people. Nobody listened to her.
I'm going to come back to this in a second, Mr. Durst. I want to talk about gifts to your friends. You heard your brothers, Tom and Douglas, both testify that you don't give away your money unless you have a selfish motivation. Did you hear that testimony?
No,
I want you to assume that both of your brothers testified to that. Do you agree that that's accurate?
I don't know how they would possibly know
Would you
what I
agree?
do with my money. And there's been plenty of evidence suggesting that I gave Susan Berman a lot of money.
Well, Mr. Durst, you would agree that if in fact Susan Berman had made the call for you in 1982, she had you over a barrel and you would pretty much have to give her whatever she wanted, correct?
I would not agree with that. And I gave her money all during our relationship, long before Kathy disappeared.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that you are not someone to give lavish gifts to your friends? Would you agree?
I would not agree with that. No.
Did you ever give Nick Chavin a gift?
I would never give Nick Chavin a gift, but I think Emily and Stuart Altman testified that I gave them a car.
You gave them a car, Mr. Durst, when you were aware that Emily Altman knew that you had been in Los Angeles at the time, information that she was hiding and eventually ended up admitting during the pendency of this case, correct?
Overruled.
No, not correct.
Isn't it true, Mr. Durst, that in fact, Emily Altman's admission during her testimony that you had told her that you were in Los Angeles at the time of the murder was probably the key piece of evidence in this case that has now put you in the position where you have to admit you wrote the cadaver note, correct?
Sustained.
I thought
Sustained.
It was sustained, Mr. Durst.
during your interview,
Sustained, Mr.
Emily
Durst.
Altman,
Judge sustained the objection.
I'm waiting on the judge.
No,
you
I
sustained it.
sustained it. Don't answer.
Mr. Durst, you were sitting in the courtroom when Emily Altman testified that you had told her you were in Los Angeles at the time of Susan's murder, correct?
I was sitting in the courtroom and I heard Emily Altman spending most of her time, quote unquote, crying her eyes out. I thought you did a pretty good job of making it clear that Emily Altman was a highly unreliable witness.
Mr. Durst, Emily Altman said that you were in Los Angeles at the time of the murder, correct?
Emily Altman, in response to your question, Emily Altman, ma'am, do you know if Robert Durst was in Southern California, Los Angeles, when Susan Berman was murdered, and Emily Altman swallowed the bait whole and announced that Robert Durst was in Southern California, in Los Angeles, staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel.
Mr. Durst, up until that moment, for 17 years, you had said repeatedly that you were not in Los Angeles. Is that correct?
Well past that moment.
Correct. And you had said this under oath. You'd committed perjury to escape the idea that you were in Los Angeles at the time of Susan's murder, correct?
So I repeatedly stated, both before Emily Altman made her stupid statement and after Emily Altman made her stupid statement, that I was in Northern California when Susan Berman was murdered.
You're calling it a stupid statement, Mr. Durst, but you've now agreed that stupid statement that you were, in fact, that you told her you were in Los Angeles at the time of Susan's murder is true, correct?
But not that I was staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel. Emily Altman just made that up on the spur of the moment.
So, Mr. Durst, again, you would agree that right up until that time and even afterward, you had sworn under oath I was never in Los Angeles, and then Emily Altman, and what you said was a, quote, stupid statement, testified that you had admitted to her you were in Los Angeles. That's what happened, correct?
I lied about being in Southern California right up until whenever my lawyers stipulated that I had written the cadaver note.
Right, and between the time that you told Emily that you were in Los Angeles and the time where she admitted to it in 2017, you would agree that she possessed a very damning piece of evidence. Is that correct?
Emily Altman guessed, and she guessed that I was staying at the quote-unquote Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel.
Mr. Durst, isn't it true? I don't want to talk about the Beverly Hills Hilton. Did you?
That's what she said. No wonder you don't want to talk about it.
Mr. Durst, did you tell Emily Altman that you were in Los Angeles at the time of Susan's
No, I
murder?
would not tell Emily Altman that.
So your testimony is that it turns out you were in Los Angeles at the time of the murder, but you never told Emily Altman that. Is that your testimony?
Correct.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that the idea, the fact that you gave Stuart and Emily Altman a very expensive Lexus between the time she alleges that you told her this damning information and the time when she revealed it, that that could be taken by someone looking at it as an effort to keep her happy and quiet?
No.
So you don't believe that a person looking at the situation could say, well, Emily Altman has this damaging information and I don't want that information to come out, so I'm going to buy she and her husband a very expensive Lexus. You don't think it would be reasonable to say, gosh, that almost sounds like a bribe?
I think if you were paying attention to my telephone calls,
Oh, I pay attention to your telephone calls, trust me.
so you heard me tell Stuart Altman.
Mr. Lewin, I've
Yeah.
told you not to comment like that on a witness's testimony. Just ask questions.
Understood, Your Honor.
You heard me tell Stuart Altman that his wife was acting like a babbling idiot. And Stuart Altman said that I was being too tough on her, that you would have given her the most difficult cross-examination he had ever heard. At which
Mr.
point, I reminded Stuart Altman, the attorney, that you had not cross-examined Emily Altman, but that it was on direct testimony that she was acting like a babbling idiot.
Mr. Durst, when you've talked about Emily Altman acting like a babbling idiot, or when you've criticized her testimony, you would agree what you have not said is that Emily Altman was lying, correct?
If I did not say she was lying, I'll say it now. Emily Altman was lying. I did not stay at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that the big significance of Emily Altman's testimony is not where you said you stayed, but the fact that you were in Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills, at the time that Susan Berman was murdered?
Emily Altman answered your question. Emily Altman, I'll bet you don't even know if Robert Durst was in Southern California, in Los Angeles, when Susan Berman was murdered. And Emily Altman assured you that she did know that I was in Southern California, in Los Angeles, staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel.
Mr. Durst, Emily Altman, you would agree, did not testify that you were staying at the Beverly Hilton. She testified that's what you said. Is that correct?
Clarification, is that what you said, or is that correct?
No,
That's he asked if that's what he asked.
Yeah, but if it's ambiguous, what's the question, mean?
question's very clear, Your Honor.
Yeah, I understood it. That's, yes, overruled.
Emily Altman testified that I was in Southern California, in Los Angeles, staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel, which I was not. She kind of got the name wrong. There's the Beverly Hills Hotel and there's the Beverly Hilton. They're different places. She managed to lump it all together and call it one hotel.
Mr. Durst, my question is, Emily Altman testified, correct, not where you were staying. She testified to what you told her. Is that correct?
She testified that I was in Southern California, in Los Angeles, staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel. It had nothing to do with what I told her. She stated it as a fact.
Mr. Durst, didn't she in fact testify that she spoke to you and you told her that that's what happened? Isn't that what happened?
No, she did not say Bob told me that he was in Southern California, in Beverly Hills, staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel. Emily Altman just stated it as a fact.
You said she mixed up the Beverly Hills Hotel and the Beverly Hilton Hotel. What did you mean by that?
Well, there are two different hotels. There's the Beverly Hills Hotel and there's the Beverly Hilton.
Well, when you say she mixed it up, Mr. Durst, are you saying that in fact you didn't tell her you were staying at the Beverly Hilton, that you told her you were staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel? Is that what that means?
I'm saying that she did not know what she was talking about. And she just, in her response to you, lumped the two hotels, not knowing that they were two hotels. She said he was staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel, which is the name of no hotel.
So it's your position, Mr. Durst, that there was not a Beverly Hills Hilton hotel? Is that your position?
My position is that there's a Beverly Hills hotel and a Beverly Hilton hotel.
So when she said you were staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel, can you tell me how that would mean she mixed up anything, unless what you're saying is you told her you were staying not at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel, but the Beverly Hills Hotel?
I did not tell her that I was in Southern California. I did not tell her I was in Los Angeles. And I did not tell her that I was staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel. Emily Altman managed to babble all of that on her own.
But Mr. Durst, you're now saying that in fact you were in Beverly Hills at Susan's house. So how did Emily know that if she was just babbling?
I am not saying I was in Beverly Hills. I am saying that I arrived at Susan Berman's house on Benedict Canyon before the killer had left, and that I promptly myself left.
Well, I want to stop you. So now you're saying that the killer was actually in the house when you were there?
I believe the killer was either still in the house or in the yard when I arrived.
Mr. Durst, haven't you testified that Susan's body was cold?
I did not testify that Susan's body was cold.
Do you have it ready to go or not? I think they call that a cliffhanger. We can do this tomorrow, Your Honor?
We have the clip.
Oh, do we have it?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good clip.
Play it.
Yeah, RD 746,
It's later on in the outline. Sorry.
312, 312A.
Thank you.
I put my hand over her face. I might have left that out to see if she was breathing, see if I could feel breath, and it felt cold.
Well, what do you have to say about that?
Her breath felt, her face felt cold.
She's dead. What do you mean her breath felt cold? Was she breathing on you when you got there?
No, she was not breathing.
So how can her breath be cold when she's dead? She's a stiff.
I put my hand on her face, and it was cold.
So Mr. Durst, let's go back to what I said a moment ago. You said the killer was in the house. I asked you, well, Mr. Durst, didn't you say that Susan's body was cold? You said, no, I never said that. Now you're saying that Susan's body was cold, correct?
I'm not saying her body was cold.
So what was cold, Mr. Durst? Let me stop you. Do you agree she can't breathe on you? Would you agree?
Her face was cold.
Her face was cold.
Correct.
So you believe that her face would have been a different temperature than the rest of her body?
I have no idea.
So the part of her body, well, you picked her up by the arms and the hands. Remember you're saying you lifted her 6 inches up the ground?
Correct.
She was cold, wasn't she?
Her face felt cold.
What did her arms and hands feel like when you picked her up?
When I lifted her up by her arms, I did not feel it was cold.
But you said her face was cold, correct?
Correct.
If her face was cold, Mr. Durst, would you agree that even though you're not a forensic pathologist, that would indicate she'd been dead for some period of time? Would you agree?
I don't know whether a period of time is 5 minutes or an hour or 2 hours.
So it's your position that she might have been only dead for 5 minutes, her face is cold, and that the killer is still in the house. Is that what you're telling this jury?
Correct.
We can start again tomorrow, Your Honor.
Yes, tomorrow.
9 o'clock. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case.